Dr. Bruce Abramson. Bruce Abramson is the Executive Director of Recruitment and Partnerships of the Applied Data Science Program at New College of Florida. He holds a PhD in Computer Science from Columbia and a JD from Georgetown. He has contributed to scholarly literature of computing, law, and business, published 8 books, and written about 300 opinion columns discussing a wide range of policy and political issues, including religious freedom. I think I've written about 300 words this year, so 300 opinion columns is really impressive. His most recent book, American Spirit or Great Awakening, discusses America's spiritual crisis, the metaphysics of wokeism, and the tension between them.
I'm going to take things in a somewhat different direction. I'm going to put the concept of religion that appears in the American founding within broader historical context. And more than that, I'm going to argue that this was a critical question coming at a critical turning point for Western civilization, and that everything that we saw in the late 18th century has defined everything that's come after it for the last 250 years. Now, why is this point so important? Because, again, I believe that the most important decision that a society makes is where you draw the line between the law of God and the law of man. That's more important than republic versus monarchy. It's more important than authoritarian versus democratic. It's more important than capitalist versus communist. Where you draw the line between God and man. Now let's start. The Declaration of Independence says, actually defines who Americans are. It's a wonderful abstract opening. We, the new Americans, hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. We've got a creator in there. Okay? Creator doesn't have a name, not called God, not called Jesus. We've got a creator, and the creator endows people with rights. And everything that develops in America from there is downstream of that statement. In fact, the Declaration goes on later because, quite frankly, just saying that we believe that the Creator endowed us with inalienable rights doesn't really tell us anything about what we're doing here. It tells us who we are. What are we doing? Well, government, which we'll get to in 13 more years, government is instituted by men to secure these rights. So the Creator has endowed us with rights, and government is a completely man-made institution whose sole job is to secure the rights that God gave us. Now, it turns out that at just the time we were having this conversation, there was a twin revolution going on across the Atlantic, and there's a sister document. It's the French Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. And what do they say in that document? And by the way, it talks about many of the same rights. These are wonderfully parallel documents that should be studied together. But what does it say about God, about Creator, about where rights come from? It says in its preamble, the National Assembly recognizes and proclaims, in the presence and under the auspices of the Supreme Being, the following rights of man and citizen. Very different approach. What's going on in France? We, the people, the French Assembly, man, have decided that these rights exist. And by the way, we're not total atheists, even though we just killed more clergy than nobles, but we're not total atheists. There is a Supreme Being. He's welcome to watch. Being the Supreme Being, we'll assume he can bring his own chair and he's got a good view. Hang out, we'll tell you what we're doing. Radically different approach. Now, why did we need these radically different approaches? Why was this question floating around at that time? And how does this frame discussion? Let me go back a little bit. Let's fade back a little bit before the founding of America. Let's go back to Western civilization. We toss the word around a lot. I like defining my terms. What is Western civilization and where did it come from? Where did it start? Well, maybe some people disagree. I peg the starting point as coming about 2,400 years ago when Alexander the Great conquers Judea. Now what happens? Hellenistic culture and Judean culture are very different cultures, but they discover that they have some very, very important and very unusual things in common. These are both extraordinarily literate cultures. They're literary cultures. They're full of people who like talking about ideas, and they're full of people who actually like writing the history of their people grounded in God. Okay? And what you start getting is a tremendous amount of exchange between these cultures and their differing ideas, their differing concepts and approaches to logic, to reasoning, to idea, to God. You start getting this amazing cross-fertilization. And it takes about 400 years before we get to what is a legitimate fusion ideology. Okay? It is not Greek, it is not Hellenistic, it is not Judean, it is pure fusion. It's called Christianity. Okay? Christianity cannot fit cleanly into either Judean or Hellenistic culture. It borrows from both, and you can see it in early Christian writings. I mean, most obviously, Jesus was a Jewish rabbi preaching to Jews. Paul was a Jewish rabbi preaching to Gentiles, and Luke is a Greek preaching to Gentiles. These are the first three leaders of the movement. If you look at the Gospels, Matthew, at least to my non-specialist eye, reads like Hebraic literature. John, again to my non-specialist eye, reads like Greek literature. They were both Jewish. Okay? This is a fusion movement. And it bubbles up, and it actually creates problems. Christianity scares the Roman Empire in ways that Judaism didn't. The Romans didn't like the Judeans. Okay? The Judeans were annoying. They were a hard province to conquer. They didn't much care about the Jews. There was a huge diaspora Jewish community not living in Judea, living throughout the entirety of the Roman Empire, that nobody talks about because nobody much gave a damn about them. They weren't a problem. The Judeans were a rebel province. Didn't care about Jews. Christians were different. Christians were out evangelizing. Christians were out telling the people of Rome, give up your traditions, move away from your God, change who you are, come over to us. This was a danger. And it's one of the reasons that the Romans and the Christians didn't get along for several centuries until Constantine decides that he's going to set himself up as the patron of Christianity, and he's going to declare Christianity to be the official religion of the Roman Empire. Now here's a problem. Okay? If Christianity is the official religion of the Roman Empire, well, we kind of need an official Roman Christianity, because there wasn't a Christianity at the time. There were a lot of them. There were a lot of them. There were, by counts that I've seen, 200 Gospels floating around. Everybody wanted a different canon. There were different philosophies. There were differing views on everything. There were a lot of Christianities. So pretty much the first thing that Constantine does is he convenes the Council of Nicaea, and he says, get me an official Roman Christianity. So they do, and it leads to an institution called the church. And the church is very much a tool of imperial governance. Okay? It is the representation of official Roman Christianity. And it's got a couple of things. First of all, it's got monotheism, which it inherits from the Jews. Okay? It's got universalism, which is new. Okay? This is a radical concept. Prior to Christianity, nobody ever said there's only one way to God. I mean, the pagan world, pagans were, ecumenical on these things, right? I mean, I had my God in my town, and when I went visiting somewhere, the first thing I did was I said, let me go honor your God, so it'll be nice to me while I'm here, and I don't worry that my God is feeling jealous back home. The Jews got in trouble because they didn't play that game, but even then they were cut some slack, because you know what? You guys have been doing this for 1,000 years. It's your shtick. Go stick with it. But universalism is brand new. The third thing that the church inherits is imperial governance. Okay? And empires, all empires, every single one, if there's an exception, I haven't found it, have certain things in common. First of all, they're all multicultural. Why? Because you can't be an empire until you've conquered other people. Just can't get there. So you got other people. Second thing is, they're all supremacist. In no empire are the conquered people equal under the law to the emperor's people. I mean, setting aside the slaves and the women and all the other people, I didn't really count. They're all supremacist. And the church basically takes this approach. The church basically says, okay, we, essentially, now that we're in charge, Christians are first under the law. What do you do with everybody who's not Christian? Well, who's not Christian? Well, you got a big group, particularly early on, who are pagans. Okay? Pagans need to be converted. Eventually, we figure out if we can't convert them, we'll kill them. You know who's worse than pagans? In fact, you know who's worse than anybody? Heretics. Heretics cannot be tolerated. All of those Christianities that just got weeded out at the Council of Nicaea, they've all got to go. They've all got to go. And in fact, This is a church emphasis for well over 1,000 years. Okay? You've got the heretics who were there because they were Christian ideologies prior to the church. But you've also got a history. Every couple of centuries, every couple of generations, some movement rises up that says the people running the church today have taken our faith in the wrong direction, and we have to snap it back to where it is. And throughout all of church history, some of those things are incorporated as reforms, and others are squelched as heresies. Heresies cannot be tolerated. Now, who does that leave? Well, it leaves the Jews, and no one knows what to do with the Jews. And there's a huge debate about this in the first several centuries of Christianity. There are some very, very anti-Jewish writers who want to de-Judaize Christianity. They lose. They lose. Council of Nicaea, there are a few councils that come after that. You eventually incorporate the entire Jewish canon as the Old Testament. And you get up to the critical player who was St. Augustine. And Augustine basically puts the matter to rest. He says, we can't purge the Jews. We need the Jews. They must be preserved. They must also be degraded. He comes up with what's known as the witness doctrine, okay? And he's got a theological idea behind it, which is the way that we know that Christ is the Messiah is that he was a fulfillment of prophecies. But the prophecies were all Jewish prophecies coming from Jewish prophets written in Jewish books. So we basically need to keep the Jews as our librarians. Okay? When the pagans say to us, why should we accept your God? We can say, look, the Jews will vouch for the prophecies that he fulfilled. Now, as far as I know, it never actually worked that way. I'm unaware of any recorded history of any pagan group ever saying, hey, Christians, I thought you were full of crap, but if the Jews will vouch for your prophecy, I'm becoming a Christian. As far as I know, it never worked. But ironically, he did set up, okay, he did set up one more important aspect of Western civilization, and that is that at every important juncture, at every important time, one of the questions that must be asked by every Western culture is, what the hell do we do with the Jews? Okay? It is uniform throughout history. And what's more, the witness doctrine actually plays itself out in inverse form. If you want to know the material and spiritual health of a Christian community, look to the Jews living in its midst. Because when Christian communities throughout Christendom face material threats, war, famine, plague, economic downturn, the Jews are scapegoats. When Christian communities face spiritual challenges, heresies that are hard to squelch, crusades, they take it out on the Jews along the way. So if the Jews are being oppressed, something is going wrong with the Christians around them. If the Jews are doing well, if the Jews are left alone, as they are through many periods in European history, they develop their own scholarship and they become loyal contributing citizens. So we got this paradigm that's going on, and this goes on for a millennium. Okay? There is still an imperial paradigm going. There's still an imperial paradigm. Christendom is governed as if it were an empire. It's a loose empire. It's a decentralized empire. But there is still this notion that there's a strict monopoly. The only way into the kingdom of heaven is through Christ. The only path to Christ is through the church. That's a pretty powerful monopoly. And anybody who doesn't play is a second-class citizen. Now, this lasts for about 1,000 years until Martin Luther comes up with a challenge to church. Church can't co-opt it, can't turn it into a reform movement, and they can't squelch it. And they don't know what to do about it. So we get a couple of centuries of wars. Okay? And these reach a stalemate at the end of the 30 Years' War and the Peace of Westphalia. And the Peace of Westphalia comes up with a rule that says the faith of the king is the faith of his kingdom. Now, many will tell you that this is the roots of religious tolerance. It's also the roots of religious discrimination, right? It says, hey, if I'm a Catholic king living next door to a Protestant king who's oppressing Catholic citizens, that's none of my damn business. So we got these issues, but what it really does is it completely shatters the governance structure of Western civilization. Okay? We no longer know what is holding us together as a civilization. We have no idea. We took something that had been there forever, we shattered it, we destroyed it, and we replaced it with nothing. And how do we know we replaced it with nothing? Because in the 125 years following the Peace of Westphalia, there were 2 rounds of bloody wars. One of them runs from about late 1680s to the mid-1710s, with the biggest war there being the War of Spanish Succession. The other one runs from 1740 through the mid-1860s, War of Austrian Succession, 7 Years' War, French and Indian War. And you know what these wars are about? They're about nothing. Nothing. They are strictly a matter of who's got power right now and how much of it can we grab. We have a civilization that is falling apart. It is fighting amongst itself over nothing other than who's got the most power today. Now we come up to our 2 revolutions in the late 18th century. And we don't know how to hold things together. Now, the American and French Revolution come up with 2 radically new concepts. The American concept, Americans come up with what is really, for the first time, a Protestant structure. I'm not talking about Protestant theology. I'm not talking about Protestantism. I'm talking about a Protestant governance structure, in much the same way that the church was defined to be an adjunct to the Roman Empire and therefore imperial. They come up with a Protestant structure, and they need it because, unlike Westphalia, which basically, let all kings go off in their own directions, and you get kind of local monopolies on faith. And I mean, as far as the Vatican is concerned, England and Prussia may both be Protestants, but Anglicans and Lutherans don't necessarily see themselves as being the same religion. In the Americas, people are living intertwined. Right? There's just no way that you can form any of these states, much less a unified country, unless we find some way for people to get along together. And they come up with this brilliant structure. What they basically do is they go back and they think about the different layers of religion. Okay? And they come up with a theory that says what we're going to do is we're going to have a shared morality. Okay? There is a baseline morality. There's an objective morality. We expect everybody to behave. But when it comes to theology, we're ecumenical. So your behavior on this world, that's subject to the laws of man. Whether or not it gets you into the next world, that's up to God. We have no opinion. And this is what's reflected in our 2 documents, in the 2 clauses, the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause. Now, what's going on in France? France has a very different answer, a very important answer. France says, Christendom had a good run. It's done. It's not how we organize our societies anymore. We have new ideas. And this is the first victory of utopian thinking. And they wipe out, the French Revolution, okay, wipes out the calendar tied to Christ. We got a New Year 0. It wipes out the fall of man. Humanity is perfectible. Right? It wipes out the month and the year because they're not logical. We end up with 10 months, which, is not just taking on Christianity, it's picking a fight with the moon. Okay? They're starting everything from scratch. And now this is what we have. Western civilization, 250 years ago, comes up with these 2 different answers to the relationship between the rule of man and the rule of God. One is shared core morality, objective, grounded in biblical morality, theologically ecumenical. The second one says, no, we just need a new set of ideas. It's fundamentally new. And this defines everything that happens in the West for the next 250 years. Now, how do I know some of this? Because of this important question that we said we have to ask all the time. What about the Jews? Now, the French Assembly actually asked the question explicitly. What about the Jews? And the famous line comes from the Count Clement de Tonnerre. He says, we must refuse everything to the Jews as a nation, but accord everything to Jews as individuals. What's the view here? As far as he's concerned, Jew is a category within Christendom, which isn't completely wrong, right? And since we've gotten rid of Christendom, the Jew category is evaporated. Of course, it denies any agency to the Jews. It denies any affirmative identity. It denies that anybody might think of themselves as Jews. It denies that the Jews think of themselves as Jews completely independent of Christianity. Jews do not spend a lot of time thinking about Christianity unless they got to deal with Christian governance. Why is it in the United States? Well, you know what? Nowhere. We don't ask that question. Not in the Declaration of Independence. It's not in the Constitution. Sitting around wondering. No one's bothered asking, what about the Jews? So you know who asks the question? The Jews. You get a letter from the Jewish community in Newport, Rhode Island, and they write what is really a very standard letter written by minority communities following a regime change. They write to George Washington, and they say, wow, we can't believe our luck. Who would have imagined that we could live in a country that would choose such a benign, kind, enlightened, handsome, tall leader? And on tall, they're lucky it wasn't James Madison, because George Washington was in fact tall. They write him this glowing letter. And George Washington writes back, and he pretty much lets on he knows they're blowing smoke up his ass. But he has some nice things to say too, because they want to know, what about the Jews in this new regime? And he writes, happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens, in giving it on all occasions their effectual support. Now what's key here, all right, he says, look, the only thing I care about is, are you a good citizen? That doesn't mean, do you think of yourself as a good citizen? It means I have an objective notion of good, and I expect you to conform to it. And it happens to work very well for the Jews because good is defined in biblical morality, which is overwhelmingly Old Testament morality. Right? The difference between Old Testament and New Testament morality is marginal, and it's mostly tweaks. Now we have this system. How does the American system work for religion? Well, it turns out it's phenomenal. Okay? Constitution is passed in 1789. Second Great Awakening starts in the 1790s. You got 50 years of massive, by the time of the Revolution, less than 20% of America was church-going. This turns around entirely. And by the middle of the 19th century, the sociology of American Christianity looks like nothing anywhere else. And who are the big winners? Who's emerging for? The groups focused on persuasion. The evangelists, okay? They go out and they convince people of the truth of their faith. There's no coercion. Right? This is huge. Now let's take a look at some of the darker episodes in American religious history, and they prove the concept as well. 3 first non-Protestant groups, fully integrated into America, face discrimination, different forms of discrimination. Those are the Catholics, the Mormons, and the Jews. What was the gripe against the Catholics? You're too loyal to the Pope. Okay? The real concern, you are going to try to import a supremacist view of faith. You are going to say that your faith should have primacy under the law. We can't accept that because it violates one of our precepts. What was the gripe against the Mormons? Polygamy. You're undermining core biblical morality. We can't allow that. And in fact, the Mormons get rid of polygamy, and in 5 years, Utah becomes a state run by the Mormons. Okay? Once these problems are resolved, they're gone. What did the Jews face? Unusually, in all of Jewish history, no theological problems. The Jews face discrimination. We don't like Jews. We don't want you living in our neighborhood. I don't want to hire you. I don't want you in my club. No theological problem. And this is supposed to be the American structure. Right? The American structure is sign on to core morality, and we're theologically ecumenical beyond that. Now, that immediately says not every denomination of every faith can fit. If your denomination is supremacist, you're out. You cannot be part of the American polity. If your denomination violates core morality, you're out. Doesn't fit within the system. This is what's going on in America. What's going on in Europe? Utopianism has its day. Okay? The Europeans are obsessed with finding the next great thing to replace Christendom, and they give us many great things. They give us communism and socialism, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and in a far more benign form, the European Union. These are all utopian organizations. These are all ways to structure Western civilization without reference to Christianity. They're all disasters, varying forms of disasters. They're all disasters. And what happens in America? Starting in the late 1940s, going through the 1970s, Supreme Court comes up with some very disturbing interpretations of both the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause because we have a problem in law. First Amendment talks about free exercise of religion, establishment of religion. What's a religion? Anyone? Well, under American law, we have no idea. None. None. But we do know that religions are treated differently from ideologies or philosophies. So Jesus died for our sin is a creedal statement of Christian belief, and you are allowed to say it under the Free Exercise Clause, and you're not allowed to impose it under the Establishment Clause. Justice means from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. That's a creedal statement of Marxism, which we've chosen not to treat as a religion for no clear reason. I mean, maybe there's a reason, but since we don't have a definition, we don't have a test, I don't know what it is. And therefore, maybe we can stop you from saying it, or let's evaluate it under free speech principles, not freedom of religion, and you're not imposing it. So we get that. This is where we are now. And that brings us up to today. And this is the fight that is tearing apart Western civilization. We've got utopians of various stripes saying, we know the next great thing. We've got this great platform. We've got this great platform for governance that came up in the American founding that's largely been chased away. And perhaps best of all, whereas Westphalia may have obliterated church imperial governance in 1648, it actually took the church 300 years to internalize that. Okay? The Vatican did not internalize that it was only, that it had been reduced to the largest denomination among many until after World War II. And after World War II, Vatican leaders looked up and said, we were completely impotent in the face of the Nazis. Nazism was a pagan movement, and we were completely impotent. What's more, if Europe does reunify, it's going to do so as a utopian institution, not as a Christian one. And they start thinking about, for the first time, what it means to be but the largest denomination among many. And this is some of the stuff you start seeing coming up in Vatican II. Now, where are we today? We're in very bad shape, okay? The utopians are surging, right? Utopian thinking, wokeism, progressivism, globalism, these are all utopian ideas. They are extraordinarily popular across the West. The American framework, based in, modeled after Protestantism, has been eviscerated. It's not out there. We have thrown things open. The Free Exercise Clause has become a free-for-all, whether or not you share our core morality, and we've let in supremacist groups. Most Western Muslim organizations are Islamist and supremacist. That's not saying that Islam is supremacist. Whether it is or not is not up for me to decide. It is to say only non-supremacist Muslim denominations are compatible with America. The supremacist ones aren't. You're starting to see terrible stuff online, particularly with new converts who are finding faith, trying to bring back some of the worst doctrines in Christian history. I've seen sniping on, forget the anti-Semitism, I've seen sniping online between Catholics and Protestants that could have come out of the 16th century. I mean, this stuff is ugly. Orthodoxy is coming back into the mix. And the key question, what about the Jews, is back on the front pages for the first time in decades. And what we're seeing is that it's not pretty. We are seeing all of the signs of a deeply unhealthy Western civilization. The Jews are being scapegoated. Christianity is floundering. We have no governance structure. If we want to get back to where we are, we have got to focus the courts on defining religion, on understanding that the Free Exercise Clause is not a free-for-all, on determining that the Establishment Clause really is broader than just those things that call themselves a religion. And we need to treat ideology in the same way. It would help to rekindle a little bit of knowledge of our faith, because one of the big problems that you see among all the new converts is that they combine deep, genuine, heartfelt passion with extraordinarily shallow knowledge. And that is a very dangerous combination. So I know I've gone over my time, but that's 2,400 years of history. So.
Join us in falling in love with America again.